I'm Coach Oyama. Fuck. I messed up the script. And I have a passion to help you improve. I specialize in improvement through macro, and I do all my coaching for free. All you got to do is DM me. This chat thing. Here's my resume if you're curious. I'm going through, and I'm just going to create VODs on everyone that I see in this server. Or if you're watching this without context, I'm just doing VOD reviews because I like doing VOD reviews. At the end of this, I want to give you 3 different things to improve on in your macro, and hopefully help you become a better player. Yeah, obviously, I've had high-level support and tank gameplay. All right, into the. I'm just gonna watch this raw and go through and try to give you a better understanding of the game, and hopefully that will be able to influence your decisions going into this. So first of all, the way that I like to view everything before going into the game, look at the team comps and see how you should be playing and how you fit into the team comp in a broader image. So for example, you're both on Rhine Mirror, so you're both playing to brawl-ish, or your tanks make space to brawling. They have a Widow, so that's a threat to you. They also have a Cass, so that's not really as much of a threat, but he's going to be pocketed by the Mercy. That's something that you can play around. You're on Anakiri, you have a lot of healing, a little less main support utility. You have Soldier who can maybe mark the cast, and you have Genji who can dive. Not really very good. Their supports have a weakness in the backline. So for you, if you can get an anti or sleep past the Rhine and just going into this match and understanding what you can do to better your chances of winning, that's a really big W. So let's see into this. Oh, scoping. Okay, so real quick micro tip. Don't ever challenge a Widowmaker on Ana. Don't ever do it. Don't ever do it. It's not worth it. Not at the lowest ranks, not at the highest ranks. The only time you'll see people doing it is like people who have hubris and like, you know, Jonak like in a smurfing. Okay, so here we have a positioning. Let's go into third person so you can see what's going on here. Okay, first of all, where's your Rhine? Okay, he's coming back from spawn. But nevertheless, your positioning here, you want to be playing around corners because remember, you have to stay alive to be able to provide value for your team, and staying alive is one thing on its own. So the way you do that is you play around the corners. And so the corners here, you were in a really good spot up here. Not saying that this wasn't, you shouldn't have stayed up here because the Widow is a threat to your positioning up here. But when you drop down here, stepping out here, you create what I call, in essence, you'll learn pathing. You should be in a good position, not only playing around the corner, but also have your exit path, have your plan B, have your plan C, have your plan D. So when you're in this position, your plan B is nowhere to be found, and you only have your plan A of maybe looking at these corners, maybe having this truck, but then your plan C and plan D, once they push you, is die. And so that's really hard. So if you play around this ticket booth and use this corner over here, and only just be aware of this window and that high ground up there. Here, let me just epic pan this real quick. Only be aware of this window and this high ground up here. Those are your only threats to the Widow, and then the Cassidy is way easier to line of sight, and he'll never flashbang you. So from a positioning state, just on this, I feel like this is going to be a commonly recurring idea of not properly assessing the threat of the Widowmaker. Because, you know, she won't hit all of her shots, but if you play like she will hit all of her shots most of the time, you're probably going to get a better understanding of how to play the game. Again, your positioning, we don't know where the Widowmaker is because you don't have wall hacks. That would be nice if you did. But remember to make sure to play around the corners and play like they're going to hit every shot, because even if they don't, it's way better for you too. Looking at that team fight, I think you could have saved your Rhine with a little bit more of mechanics, but rather than, you know, nitpicking on the fights that aren't your fault and not under your very... It's a really small thing to complain about, where it's not much that you can improve on. So, okay, ability cooldown usage. I saw you sleep the wall there and anti the cast here. It's important to realize the context in which you're using your abilities, because those are your bailouts. Those are part of your plan B and plan C. If they push you around the corner, you need those to be able to stay alive. And so especially since you're not playing around a corner here and your plan B and plan C aren't very safe, where, for example, if you're over here, your plan B and plan C is duck, and they can never hit you, you need a cooldown, and as a generality, one cooldown to prevent the enemy DPS from just running into you so you're not helpless, and you can be like ML7 never dies on Ana. That's because he manages his cooldowns. So here in this, especially in this aggressive angle, if you're not able to win the team fight through your immediate ability usage and be safe because the enemies are dead, it's very important to understand that your plan B and plan C will be, again, don't pick the Widow, will be a little less effective if you don't have your cooldowns at your disposal. Okay, going into this fight, I like that play from a macro positioning perspective. It tells me that you take risks and that you're playing with your tank and you have a good understanding of flow in the game. That you're not just playing really far away from your Winston when your Winston strength brawl. Again, the positioning, remember about plan B, plan C. We want to be playing around corners, and we want to, this is a prime example of where your plan B backfires, because I know you're going to die in stagger here. That's a lie. They didn't push. But if they pushed, you would have died in stagger. So yeah, this is a very dire situation. You're probably going to die in stagger. And although it doesn't seem like too bad of a mistake, this is an entire 30 seconds on your entire team. And 30 seconds is a lot. If you think of it in percentages, any percent increase to raise your chances of winning is really good. And if you're alive in this fight, and because you got out, this would have been so much better, and you would have been able to provide so much value and raise your chances of winning. Okay, going into this fight, it's the same thing. Let's talk about ult tracking, and I'm going to see from your decisions how you manage to... okay, again, watch the corners and peeking the Widow there. I can tell that you're slightly but not fully aware of that Widow. That's a very common spot, by the way, so if you can memorize more common spots, that'll help you out rather than having to think about it physically every single time. So you do have Nanoblade into this fight here, and they have a lot of ultimates. So from a macros perspective, it's a game of chess. Who uses them first, and what situation do you use them? From a micro perspective, your movement is very tied to your aiming. So if we go back here and we look at your sleep on this and put it at 0.25, I can tell that you're panicking a little because he popped his ult. Stop. Breathe. You're a sniper. Exhale. Stop moving. Shoot the sleep. Move again to get out of the line of sight. If you're moving while you're shooting your sleep, it should be in one direction. You should have full control, or else you won't hit that sleep. Okay, back into the macro. But if you nanobladed into this fight, there's a chance that you guys kill the enemies before they're able to win. The terrible ultimate from your soldier, because you guys are down 2 and you probably aren't going to win into their ults because they have way more ults than the amount of people who are alive in the fight. But needless to say, to raise your chances of success, when you have ultimates, a good rule of thumb is you know, it's not always a good rule of thumb, but going first will raise your chances of succeeding way more, because it'll disable the enemies if you kill them. So I really like this play here. You think it's winnable, you nano the Genji, huge, really good combination with your Genji. A little bit of awareness here. You could have touched the cart. It's not a very sustainable option, because you know you probably would have died when you touched the cart, but it'll give you a little bit more chance of living. You're just punching that mercy. If you, what works. If you can't aim and you punch, so be it. But again, it's go into Kovacs sometimes, practice your movement, and then practice your aim, and then get it all under control, so then ideally you're able to hit those shots. But then again, that's just grinding, and that's just getting used to the mechanics. If you're a console player going into PC, I don't know your story. Mechanics will come eventually. It's in the fact that you need to understand the overall image to be able to improve those mechanics. Okay, so going into this fight, again, we have a swap here. We have actually a couple of swaps where their Widow is off of Widow into Echo, and you're in this next point here. So it's important to shift your mindset every point. You're no longer playing the same game. This is a completely different game. We're still playing Overwatch, but the way in which you play is much different compared to before, or not too much different in the grand scheme of things. But it's different, and you need to at least acknowledge that it's different. Also, again, if peeking into a window is as great of a threat as peeking into a Widowmaker, because you don't know who's behind that Widow, and you can't properly gauge and think out everyone who's behind that window. If you get tapped by Baptiste and tapped once in the head by Cassidy, you're dead. So it's not worth that risk of peeking that window unless you're, like, you know, throwing a cooldown. Just watch out for that extended peeking period. Going into this fight, I love your positioning here. This is perfect. Your plan B is going inside that room. There's a health pack. Your plan C is dipping all the way back into spawn or going onto the staircase where there's no LOS. Yeah, this right here is really good. Again, not as solid as before, but it shows me that you know that play angles, play for your plan B and plan C to be able to get out. Watching that fight, your Genji kind of threw, to be honest. You went ahead of your team. That sleep dart's a bit adventurous. I would say, looking at the grand scheme of things, it's very hard to understand when should I sleep. It just feels like overwhelming. When should I sleep? When should I ante? If you're able to align into your team's philosophy of a very explosive compared to their composition, because you have a Genji, you have a Bastion, very cooldown based dive brawl compared to their Echoes flying in the air shooting like over this long distance period of time. If you can condense your cooldowns and sleep their Ryan, anti their DPS when your team is close to them so they can follow up on that value, that's a lot more value than getting a random sleep in the early or late fight. So right after the beginning or at the beginning of the fight, if you get a really big sleep onto the Echo, that's really good. But remember, your team is very limited on the distance and the cooldowns of your DPS. Okay, into this fight, this is just pretty much just a wash. I'm going to 1.5 this. They have ults. You guys don't have ults. You guys have the position disadvantage, and it's, yeah. You can only do so much in this position. Sometimes it sucks to suck, and you just have to suck up a loss in a fight. Needless to say, you know, it doesn't determine the overall match, but let's go into the next fight. Going into the team comps again, looking at your team comp, again, you have rotations, or sorry, ability rotations compared to the enemy's longer sustain. They still have a Widowmaker. You don't know that yet because of the tab. It doesn't show until a certain amount of seconds after. I don't even know it. But looking at your team composition, the way that you should be orienting your mind to think now is, if the fight lasts too long, they're probably going to overwhelm your team with the sustained resources that they get from the Cassidy and Mercy, as well as the potential to get a pick at any time from the Widowmaker. Watching you position here, it's good near that corner-ish, because at one hand it is an angle, on the other hand the Widowmaker is still up top, so you've got to make sure to account for that risk. See, Bert, I like your cooldowns here. I really like your cooldowns here. It's in the mid-fight where your team is really close, really able to get in and benefit off of your cooldowns. Let's talk about your focus and how to manage this fight, because it's like a huge, it reminds me of Battleground, so like there's a billion things going on. So think of your priorities of like what your job is supposed to be in your team is to enable your teammates. And on Ana, it's disrupting with your cooldowns or being able to heal and enable your team. So if we zoom back here, back 24 seconds-ish, when your Genji's up top, that's a huge 1v1. If you get a pick, that's really good. You enable your Genji through healing him. So if you threw an anti-nade up there, I would actually say that's a decent play. You see that kill for the Widowmaker and priorities, you know, killing is good. Don't take that out of context. But I like your usage of your abilities here. I just think that your prioritization of juggling, you know, there's a threat here, I have to deal with that. I can enable value here on my DPS here. The more you're aware of it, the better you'll be able to handle all these different clutterings of your mind, because it's hard. It's hard. Yeah, flanking cast. What do I do? What do I do? Again, in your micro, don't panic. Make sure that your movement and you're very calm in your thinking, and you'll get there eventually. Just have it in your mind. That's where you eventually want to be. A tip for going into this mid fight here: take a second to breathe. Sometimes, when you're focused in a mid fight, and it's very hard to analyze what's going on, especially like if you look at the owl level, sometimes the fights just devolve into who wins more 1v1s and who has the more micro abilities. But as for your mental on the macro image, you can go behind a corner, reload, and I especially on Ana recommend when you reload, take a moment to just breathe. Unless you're like in a situation where you have to reload animation cancel, or that should be like every situation. But you need to mentally reset and readjust your expectations and your observations of this fight, and that way you're able to better understand where the flankers are, for example that Hanzo, or how you can better enable your team, or where the threats are, and just readjust the entire situation. If you're at a very high level, you'd be able to ult track during the entire fight, and when you're doing that reload in a split second, it's like muscle memory. You're able to like understand what ultimates you can combo, what possibilities that you have with your nano. So that last fight, you actually had Nano Blade, and you could have used it, but and yeah, needless to say, it's very hard to keep track of all these things, but one thing that will help you keep track of these things is reload and breathe and readjust in the situation. That is a one-off occurrence because, you know, these fights aren't happening like that, but I think being aware of it will definitely help you improve, because, you know, it's hard to invent options rather than just listen to people who have made the options available. Yeah, I suck at English, but looking at this fight, your ability cooldown on that ability usage on that Hanzo is an exception. I'm just going to point that out because it's in the cleanup phase where you should be thinking. So it's okay if you use your abilities for that high risk, because there's low risk, because there's a low risk and high reward. Oh, very beautiful aiming there. That was very nice. Okay, if you were tracking ultimates there, this is a very macro image. You would know that the Reinhardt has Shatter, and that as soon as you get that kill on Baptiste, there's no more. The risk versus reward of you being up that far against that Reinhardt is very, very bad for you, because that Reinhardt could just walk towards you with shield, and you can only walk away so fast, and you're put into this situation where your efforts are more towards surviving against the Reinhardt rather than enabling your team. So Also, ideally, you should be able to track when the Reinhardt has Shatter. One easy way to do it, not very accurate. Look at your Reinhardt when he has Shatter. If the Reinhardt maybe has Shatter, if they use him at the same time every team fight. At the very beginning of the game, at least, you can track ults like that, where if my teammate is, if we have similar team compositions, if we have ultimate, they probably have ultimate, so I should be aware of that. Yeah, Hanzo on the flank. Remember, watch where you're positioning. There's a corner behind you where you didn't clear and you didn't think about the threats that could possibly be there. So that plan A, B, and C, that plan was a bit scuffed because you were positioned in an area where you weren't accurately managing your threats on the sides. If there was a flanker there, of course, you know, I'll hear it or whatever, but just maximizing your chances of success, that's one easy thing that you can keep track of. I like your positioning here, actually. Even though it doesn't seem like you're playing behind a corner, you're actually playing behind a couple of corners. Okay, again, thinking into the ultimates, you do have Nanoblade here, and if you Nanoblade here, I guarantee you Genji, if he's not, like, terrible, cleans up this entire fight, because it's so mid-fight now, they don't have the cooldowns necessary to deal with this Nanoblade. Keeping that in mind, if you're ult tracking into the fight, which, it'll come second hand eventually. Maybe not a high of a level as sometimes that I'm talking about, but you know, innately you'll think I have Nanoblade, I can use it to finish up this fight, and it's worth it to get the point. Unless you know that you're going to secure the point, it is most of the time, especially in comp, when things aren't playing out as they theoretically should, and it's very dirty, rather than a clean scrim. Just secure the point for yourself, unless you can't afford it. But you know, you have Nanoblade, secure the point, use 5 ults. Unless it's obvious that you shouldn't. Okay, going into this fight, simply a little bit of a like perspective check from your Genji's point of view. When is the best time to Nanoblade? Because it's obvious that should be what's going on. And if you know when the best time to Nanoblade, of course you're always asking your Genji, and your Genji is the one who has the initiative to ask for the Nanoblade and start it. But if you're like ML7, one thing that I like to say is always think for the view that you want to be. So if you're ML7, you know when the best time is to Nanoblade is when they don't have the cooldowns to be able to deal with it. If Ashe uses her coach, Cassidy uses his role, they use Lamp, they use GA even. If Ryan uses his charge and he doesn't have Shatter, those are really good, all small variables that stack up to create the best opportunity for your Genji to Nanoblade, because there won't be as many things shutting him down. So if you see all of those, don't be afraid to take the initiative and nano your Genji if he's in a position to be able to Nanoblade. Into this fight, I like your positioning here. There really isn't. I hate this point because of plan A, B, C, of where you can be positioning. You're playing at the best corner right now, around near the health pack, although you do have to prioritize fetching some of your attention to that high ground where that Baptiste just fights. Or I don't even know if that was a Baptiste, but watch, especially on Ana, it's easy times tunnel vision when you aim down the scope. One thing to help with that, one passive tip to help with that, like looking at your Genji here, if you quick scope, it's the same exact shooting speed, except you're able to, if you get it down in muscle memory, adjust your perspective. You shoot once, you spend that 70% of your time thinking about the shooting and aiming, but then as soon as you unscope and you're recocking your gun for the next shot, you can adjust your situation, rethink in the split of a second, breathe, and then shoot again. But in that knowing that you can breathe and think, you can think about the threats, you can think about how you can get better value, you can think about what's going to be coming in the team fight for you to be able to go forward. Coming into the end of this replay, but especially right now, this is called the pre-fight. You just had the end, the cleanup, the post-fight, and so before pre-fight and during pre-fight, you can think about all the different possibilities of what's going to happen if you know what ultimates they have. It's ideal if you know, if you're able to track the ultimates. Otherwise, you can just, you know, do the easy, rough, not accurate way of tracking the ultimates, looking at your teammates. But it's very important to track the ultimates here if you look at the team fight, because that way you're not lost. You know what can possibly happen and what you need to make happen, or what you need to deny on the enemy team, especially. If they had Bob, you would be saving your sleep. But since you know that they don't have Bob, you know, what's the point of knowing that they don't have Bob? Now you can use your sleep and you can use your anti on the Reinhardt. Needless to say, that was a very interesting timing that you can't control, that you used your sleep on the Reinhardt. But to be a better player, it's about the different options, and of course, unlucky no one touched there. I think the performance from your Ana was pretty good for a Platinum, to be honest. I think three things that you can really do. One, you can start ult tracking and realizing how your abilities can better fit into the grander scheme of things. Of course, that's a very high level and hard concept to get, especially since your mechanics, you're not very fluid with your mechanics, and it just doesn't come second nature. So you're spending more mental capital thinking about your movement, aiming, and ability usage, or hitting your abilities. But if you can you're eventually going to get that, and no matter how long of Kovacs that you spend, you will get it eventually. So it don't fret too much about your mechanics. The best way to improve in Overwatch is think about your decision making and then work on your mechanics passively, and they'll just slowly go up, but your decision making can easily plateau. So if you can start thinking about your ultimates, what options do I have? When are those options good? For example, like a couple of fights when you had the option of nanoblading, I'm sure it's like, oh, of course I had the option, but it's about knowing it in the moment and knowing that you can win that team fight with the nanoblade, and knowing your options and how strong of a likelihood you are to win that fight with the nanoblade. So that way you can make educated decisions instead of gambling and just, nanoblade, go, win, please. That's not a good way to bring about getting better as a player, even though you'll win sometimes, you'll lose sometimes, but you're not improving. Also, your positioning. Let's think about plan corners. First of all, you got that pretty much down, I feel like. But let's start thinking plan B, C, D, E, F. And of course, don't think that far, but that's just a waste of time while you're in game. Of course, you can spend as much time as you like afterwards overthinking it, whatever. But at some point, it's I'm sitting here. If I get pushed, if a threat occurs to me, just think of them as threats. Threats can be anything. One cooldown, one headshot from Widowmaker, Widowmaker taking high ground, an ultimate coming out. Where do I go next to be able to better provide value? If I put myself offline because I have to hide in a corner, that's probably not a good plan A compared to the other different plan A's that are available. Otherwise, you'll be able to do, maybe that's the best plan A, and life just sucks, and our plan B and C are just bad, no matter where we are. But if you can maximize those opportunities, especially in the downtime, I think that we can get a way better positioning here. Yeah, thinking out the threats also, I think the threats are pretty obvious. Every time you die to something, you just think about it. Think, why did I die? Widowmaker headshot, Widowmaker is a threat. Was it pocketed Cassia on the high ground? That's a threat because he was flanking on the high ground and he had an angle on me, and I had to adjust for that and go to my plan B and C. Maybe it's a cooldown, maybe it's an ultimate, like that shatter earlier on the high ground on second point. Those are all threats, and thinking about your positioning to be able to account for those threats at the possible moment. Of course, you're not going to be able to 100% account for all the threats. That's a very hard thing to do, but thinking about your positioning there. And then finally, cooldown usage in what part of the team fight you are in. In the pre-fight and in the end fight, it's not as much of a cost to use your cooldown. There's no real potential of losing anything if you use your cooldowns, but especially in this Rhine versus Rhine brawl, I see you using your sleep sometimes for very risky play, or rather using your sleep for if you're in a very bad position. So if you're in a position where you need to sustain yourself after you use one cooldown, don't use both of your cooldowns and recklessly be helpless and be like, oh, the universe must save me now or we're going to lose, and then it's the universe's fault. No. Take accountability. If you think you're better with your sleep and you can sleep a flanker and live, or if you think you can use your Bionade and hide behind your plan B corner and live, juggle that out, and in the middle of the team fight be able to say that I properly manage my cooldowns and I can live even after trying to provide value with my cooldowns, so then I can continue to provide value later. And using, I think the first priority above getting value with your cooldowns should be living with your cooldowns and being able to tie that into your plan A, B, and C. And then you can start thinking about, I can anti the Rhine here, I can sleep the Rhine here, and still be able to fall back. But needless to say, so the ult tracking and the options of what's available to you in the overall team fight would be the number one thing. That's the hardest though, so don't fret too hard about that. Just be aware of it and slowly build to it. 2 would be your positioning. Have your plan A, B, and C. Make sure that you're ready for those threats and that you know that those threats are coming. You'll eventually learn if you don't know all of the threats in the team compositions, but if you hold tab and you think for 30 seconds, of course you don't have that time, you will be able to, I guarantee you, if you have a brain and have been playing Overwatch for more than 30 seconds, think out the threats. And 3, using your cooldowns more in coordination with where the team fight is and being able to sustain yourself and take accountability for your own survival, so then you can continue to provide value for your team. Those 3 things you can immediately go into your next game and improve. And if you somehow magically get all those 3 down within the next game, I guarantee you your gameplay will be so much more solid and you'll be able to rise in ranks. Thank you.